happen on a talk show, a podcast. All right. Okay. New frontier. All right.
I'm
Kick it
here
off.
with I'm here with film producer, screenwriter, director, Brian Levant. How you doing today?
Wonderful. Nice to be with you.
Definitely. It's really amazing to talk to you virtually. And I'm a fan of your work. I grew up on a lot of your work is part of my childhood. And it was interesting to know you actually were born in Highland Park, Illinois. I'm from Chicago myself. What
Ah,
was it like, growing up in Highland Park doing that?
well, unfortunately, it was a very wonderful place to grow up. I always think of it as the leafy confines. Unfortunately, that bubble burst a couple years ago with the Fourth of July mass shooting at the parade that my wife actually had many years ago had led as a baton twirler, and so it just tends to make you look at your environment a little bit different. What high school did you go to?
I went to St. Rita and I went to Luther South.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
well, a basketball power.
Yeah, for sure. Did you go to where'd you go?
Highland Park,
Yeah.
and then off to the University of New Mexico, then Cal Arts, then the Art Institute of Chicago, and Arizona, and then back to New Mexico, where
Uh,
I ended up teaching for 6 years lately.
did you have an interest in film at that particular time?
I'll tell you, you know, my mother kept a baby book on me, and in it is a card from my nursery school teacher saying that I would grow up to be a TV impresario like Sal Hurok, who was a guy who produced in those days what was called spectaculars. Uh, uh, but I think I was hooked from the first time I watched Howdy Doody, which by the time I was born was already 5 years old, and had made thousands of licenses. Television changed childhood in that the things that were an occasional pleasure like a Tom and Jerry cartoon were now broadcast every day. You had all the animation treasures. You had the reruns of then classic shows, and the Three Stooges, and Laurel and Hardy, and just an astounding amount of programming that indoctrinated me at a very young age. And then, when you kind of realize, well, gee, you spent your evenings watching Groucho Marx and Jack Benny and Bob Hope and George Burns, these giants of the 20th century comedy who had migrated, most of them started on stage, then they went to radio and movies, and then they all went to TV because that's where the big money was.
And how amazing though, one of your first professional jobs is on Happy Days as a writer. Like, how did you
Yes,
get
yes.
that job? And if Happy Days is actually
Well,
50th
well,
anniversary.
first I tried to get a pretty good film education, and people from Highland Park were being successful in launching writing careers at young ages, and so I sort of had a blueprint of how to do it, and I wrote spec scripts. My first my my first two sales were to a Danny Thomas series called The Practice. It never got made. The show, I think the show ran out of gas before they got to it. But the next one was the Jeffersons, and before I ever got to Happy Days, and the Jeffersons allowed me to become, excuse me, at 23, a member of the Writers Guild, and I crashed Gary Marshall's Saturday morning basketball game and guarded him and blocked a couple of his shots. And he said, "So what do you do?" And I told him I was trying to be a comedy writer and was already a member of the guild. And he gave me a meeting, and I was there basically on and off for the next 8 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
And at the time, Happy Days was the #1 show.
Right. Like,
Yeah,
and
and
like all these shows, like, are really like, part of my childhood. I remember watching these shows like growing up. And like, it's like you don't really think about like the writers and who make the show, like, as far as like funny and like, all of the jokes, uh how like, important was the writing back then because like for people to stick to their script. I've heard like some shows like now where like some writers are pretty particular, but then there's also like improv.
no, I also produced Mork and Mindy for a
Right.
while with Robin Williams and Jonathan Winters, the second season. Two of the greatest improvisational minds ever. And you what you had to do, part of your job was to provide them with a platform to launch from. And then during the course of the week, hone what they did, add to it, subtract to it, and then there'll be a take or two. They just let them go. But basically, try and the same thing I did when working with Jackie Chan. You need to provide people with opportunities to show what they can do beyond other people. And it's it's like being a good assist man in basketball. You got to put them in a position to take a shot at something, and it may be great, but you're giving them a platform to show their talents. Uh, but Happy Days was much more of a written show. There was a line here or there. Somebody would come up with great, wonderful, funny, good. Uh, but they were very script based. Uh, with Robin, you never know what was going to happen, but he would become bored with material very easily, and it's like he'd get a laugh with a joke at the reading, and the next day say, "Give me another one there." So by the end of the week, you've tried 3 or 4, and then he'll go in front of the audience, and one of his gifts was an incredible memory. And he'd do all of them. He'd do them all, and then throw in 4 more. Uh, so there were different ways of working. On David Kelly shows. I used to hear if an actor wanted to change a line, if it didn't feel right, or they had trouble with it, or it contradicted something else they felt or something, you couldn't change it unless you got permission from the boss. I think that's a little insane, but hey, my first film, Problem Child 2,
Right.
I was not allowed to change a word.
Mm.
I think that on the first Problem Child, which is why the same director didn't do the second one, they they had gone off script a lot and it wasn't successful. But luckily, the script was by 2-time Academy Award nominees, Golden Globe Writers Guild Award, an Emmy Award winners, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski. So the script was very good and durable.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. That's
and
another memorable movie from my childhood, starring
yeah,
John Ritter. What was the transition like from being a writer to a director? And like how was that?
okay. So yeah, it wasn't always the plan. I'd been making Super 8 movies, since I was in junior high, but but it I decided after a couple of people butchered what I'd written that I needed to defend my own work on stage. And I really couldn't do anything about it until I had my own show, which was my Leave It to Beaver revival, which ran for 5 years, first on the Disney Channel and then on WTBS and then in syndication. And then the master tapes burned up in one of Universal's fires